Hey everybody, how are you today? Happy Juneteenth. I know that we don't get to spend any real time together through our digitally mediated communication space, which we know is Zoom, but I will get a chance to talk to you today, at least this way, where I'll record a video and I'll underscore this week's lesson number 6 on nonverbal communication. So as you can tell, I am not in the usual Washington, D.C. environment. And that's one of my neighbors passing by. He's always been really nosy, so he's probably trying to see who I'm talking to and see who I am. So yes, I'm at my parents' place, and we're celebrating Juneteenth. They're out at a celebration, and I said, you know what? I can't celebrate with you until I connect with my class and think about my class, put in the work so that you understand this week's lesson on nonverbal communication. Now, of course, there will be a quiz on this coming up, so make sure you pay attention to what I'm telling you. Of course, you have the luxury of rewinding or slowing down this lesson that I'm going to post up to YouTube for you to watch at any time. Okay, so let's begin. This week is on nonverbal communication. And as you may have guessed, nonverbal communication deals with communication that is not spoken. Or if it is spoken, it's at a minimum amount, like filler words, which we have talked about, like the ums and the ahs. Those could kind of be considered as nonverbal communication, although it's not really my preference. I tend to think of nonverbal communication as communication that is not using a person's vocal cords, not using their voice, not using the flaps of vocal cords that helps us make sound and articulate our words, okay? So what does that mean? Nonverbal communication are gestures, like we talked about last week. And those of you who were paying attention, remember, gestures and gesticulations are one and the same. What are gestures? Gestures are ways that we use other parts of our body to convey information. As you can see, I'm using my hands a little bit. Sometimes I will use my hands to emphasize a particular word, okay? And I'll use my words in accordance with how I'm using my hands. What are some other gestures that we know? I'm sure you all know gestures. Let's take a second and think of what kind of gestures we use on a daily basis. Okay, stop thinking about the crickets you're hearing. Think about the gestures you use. That's right. Some of us use nodding our head. That means typically an affirmative, a yes. If we shake our head, that's a no. What about this one? What does that mean? I don't know. Well, you do know, but this means I don't know. Okay, so you have a few of them. Of course, there are other ones. Bye. Hi, welcome. How you doing? It's kind of a circular, how you doing, right? Okay, you get the point. There are lots of gestures that we use that do not use words where we can interpret what they mean. One of the funny ones that I like to think about is in East India, they use the head wobble. And if I can find the video on that, I'll share it with you. The head wobble is something that is really almost unique to East India, or people who are from East India, East Indians. They use a head wobble. This can mean so many different things. This can mean, I agree. This can mean confusion. This could mean, hey, I'm happy to see you. We don't really use it here in America, but over there they use it, and I think it's fascinating because this can have so many different meanings. Pardon me while I wipe my brow. It's a little hot out here. Probably not wearing the best shirt. Now, one thing that the book doesn't go into is nonverbal communication that I think of as also a type of nonverbal, sweating. This book doesn't talk about it, but I was reading it and I was thinking, isn't that a form of nonverbal communication? What if I wasn't hot and I was nervous? Some people sweat when they're nervous. That's a type of communication. In this case, I'm not really nervous. I'm in a very comfortable environment and I'm just feeling really hot. I'm under the sun wearing a long sleeve shirt with a dark color. Probably not the best sartorial choice, but it is what it is. It's very neutral. I wanted you to concentrate on my words rather than what I'm wearing. Hopefully you're not concentrating too much on how much I'm sweating. Okay, so The next thing the book talks about are emblems. Emblems are actions that we all agree upon that symbolize things. And we just went into a few of those, like, I don't know, or how are you? We kind of think of emblems as ways that we know what you're saying without actually saying it. How about this one? This could mean I can't breathe or I'm choking. How about this one? Right? What does that mean? I'm cold, right? How about this one? Yeah, that's how I'm feeling right about now. I'm a little hot, okay? So these are all emblems. These are ways that we can communicate information without actually saying, I'm hot or I'm cold. If I walked up to you and it was a little warm in the room that we were both in and I just went, you would know I'm saying I'm hot. How about when you go to the market and you want to purchase something and you may not know the same language as the other person? How about if you went like this? Chances are that person will know exactly what you mean. How much is that item you would like to buy? You point to the item and you go like this. This has been an emblem recognized as money. And that's almost universal. No matter where you go in the world, if you go like this, it typically means money, especially if you're at a market. We use our nonverbal communication in many contextual situations. So if I walked up to someone on any street and just went like this, it may get a little confusing. But if I was at the market where people are buying things all the time and I went like this and pointed to something, people would probably know what I mean almost immediately. So we think of emblems as gestures and symbols with a shared meaning, a meaning that we all agree upon. Okay, let's move on. The next thing the chapter talks about is truth bias. Truth bias and deception bias. So two things, truth bias, deception bias. Truth bias is when you automatically assume that anyone's telling the truth. So if someone says something to you, maybe you like that person. What we call halo effect. I think we covered the halo effect already. When you like something about someone and you think that their positive attributes apply to the rest of their existence, the rest of their experience. What you do sometimes is you have a truth bias with that person. So you assume that they're telling the truth no matter what. You assume that they are going to give you the truth when you ask them a question. That can be a general application. If you are a person who has truth bias, you automatically assume that a person you're talking to is going to tell you the truth. You're not going to be skeptical of what they're telling you. On the flip side, if you have a deception bias, you automatically assume that whatever someone is telling you probably is not truthful and you should look into it. Okay? Which one are you? Do you have a truth bias for people or do you have a deception bias for people? Which is it? I tend to have a truth bias. Why would someone lie to me on a daily basis? So if someone tells me something, many often my students tell me things. My dog ate my homework, I went to a funeral, I had COVID, I had to pick up my child from the hospital. I hear lots of things all the time. Many oftentimes I have a truth bias and I think, okay, they're telling me the truth, but I do verify so that I can make sure I have a record. That's when I find out if someone's really telling me the truth or not. What happens with me is I assume you're telling the truth, but then if I find out that you have been deceitful towards me, then anytime you tell me things after that, I apply a deception bias. So truth bias and deception bias can also change depending on your situation. What do you do? Do you have a deception bias and then a truth bias? Or do you have a consistent deception bias, a consistent truth bias? Or do you first have a truth bias and then a deception bias? What do you do in certain situations? Okay. When we think of other things that we may do in our lives that deal with nonverbal communication, like kinesthetic. Kinesthetic means movement. How do we move about? Are we in a rush when we're talking to people? Do we speak really fast? Do we move really fast? All of those can send signals. If you're walking down the street and someone approaches you to buy something or to give you a flyer, do you just walk by them casually and say, no thanks, I'm good? Or do you pretend that you're moving really quickly and you have somewhere to go? If you move very quickly because you pretend you have somewhere to go, or you really have somewhere to go, that sends a message that you really don't want to talk to that person. However, if that person approaches you and you move up to them very slowly, maybe it shows that you would like to talk to that person and that person will engage with you. Okay, so think of kinesthetic as movement. How do you move? Without saying any words, how do you move? When you move and how you move, what message does that send the recipient, the person who's receiving the message? Manipulators are things that affect your speech. Okay, so manipulators can be fidgety behaviors. For example, if you are feeling uncomfortable, all right? If you're feeling uncomfortable in a situation, are you relaxed? Do you look the person in their eyes and just relax and listen to them? Or if you're feeling uncomfortable, do you avoid eye contact? Do you look at the ground? Do you look up at the sky? Does your legs shake? Do you kind of grip your chest and look at the ground? You know, all these things. Think about when you were a kid, the first time that you were caught taking cookies when you weren't supposed to, or sneaking something from the refrigerator that your mom told you or your dad told you shouldn't have. I'm sure it's happened to all of us. I'm not saying or not if it happened to me, but let me recollect from my childhood, since I'm here at my childhood home. When I remember when I was a kid and my parents would admonish me about something I shouldn't have been doing, maybe I would look down at the ground and I'd feel ashamed, right? So I would look at the ground. I did not want to give them eye contact because that could show defiance or anger, or that I was trying to be arrogant with them. So I looked at the ground because I felt ashamed for what I did. Maybe for taking 2 more cookies than I should have, or eating a donut after I already had dessert after dinner, right? So the point is, those are manipulators. Those are things that can convey a message without saying anything, and those can be very unique to the individual. Maybe some people show shame in a different way. Maybe they avoid eye contact looking to the side instead of looking down. Maybe they fidget with their fingers, you know, or something like that. Some people twiddle their thumbs. Some people, their legs shake, or the leg shakes. Some people use verbal manipulators, like they use verbal interrupters like ahs and ums and things like that when they're nervous, right? Think about when you're nervous and you're speaking. Sometimes you may say words in between your actual words that may not mean anything except to show that you're nervous. Sometimes you may use them to show that you still have something to say, even if it sounds like you finished your sentence. Like, well, say someone asked me, what am I going to do today? And I said, I'm going to the store, and I'm going to the market after that, and I'm going to visit my friend downtown. You hear those, okay? That means really nothing except that I'm continuing my thought. So that gives a signal to the person, don't interrupt me yet. I'm still finishing my sentence. Even though I said, I'm going to the store, which is a complete sentence, the point that I make when I say, I'm going to the store, and that means I'm still completing my sentence, and there's something else that I plan to do, which I'm going to tell you about, so don't interrupt me yet until I finish. Okay, those are manipulators. Okay, so think about those things as you communicate with other people. Do you use vocal manipulators? If you do, how do you use them? Do you use them when you're nervous? Do you use them to tell a person that you have more to say? Do you use them to tell a person you may disagree with them, right? Like if somebody said, hey, Professor Campbell, 2 + 2 is actually 5. Would I say, no, it's not. You're dumb. You don't know what you're talking about. Or would I say, really? Okay, that really could be a vocal manipulator. Not the really part, that's verbal. So is the ah and It's also verbal, but it's not really a word per se. Okay, so it's kind of like I said, those ahs and ums, those filler words, they're in between verbal communication and nonverbal communication. I consider it verbal communication, but this chapter includes it as a form of nonverbal communication because they're not actually full words. Okay, hopefully you understand that. And if you don't, we can get into more of it a little bit later on. But the point I'm making is filler words can be considered nonverbal communication because they are not full words. We also use them to describe our behavior or communicate a certain message without using a full word or a proper word. Okay? Affect blends are when we use various emotions simultaneously. Can we be surprised and disgusted at the same time? Can we be happy and excited at the same time? Can we be sad and nervous at the same time? Of course we can. Every time we have an emotion, it doesn't mean that we're only feeling one emotion. We can feel multiple emotions at the same time. Those multiple emotions can sometimes show on our face. So if I was to be surprised and happy at the same time, I'd be like, right? My eyebrows are arched, meaning surprise. My mouth is open like that because I'm smiling. If I was just happy, maybe I would be like, yeah, like that. That's just happy. If I'm surprised, I'm like, I'm surprised. My mouth is in a circle, my eyebrows are raised. But if I'm happy and surprised, maybe I look like this. Somebody threw me a surprise birthday party. I just encountered a friend who I hadn't seen in a long time. I just won $1 million. Don't I wish that were true? I would still be a teacher and teach you guys if I won $1 million though. I don't want you to get that confused. It would just be nice to have $1 million so I could maybe travel the world per se. My point is, very often we show multiple emotions at the same time. We could show concern and anger, like, the eyebrow is pushed together, our mouth is pursed. We can be angry and we could be concerned. We could also be maybe angry and confused. When you are angry but you don't know what happened, you're like, right? It shows a mixture of anger, maybe disgust, maybe confusion, okay? All of those emotions can be mixed together. Those are called affect blends. When you're mixing together emotions all at the same time, and it shows on your face. Paralanguage is the language that we don't often understand, other that it may have meanings below or what is not really being said. Okay, so let me take an example. Paralanguage is language that is not clearly spoken but can be understood through mannerisms. Okay, so if a person says that they are going to, let me give you an example. Say someone says that, hey, I'm going to go to the store with a person you don't like. And you look at that person and you're like, psh, right? What does that psh mean? That psh. Does that mean you are happy that they're going to the store with someone you don't like? Does that psh mean you're nervous? No, it probably means you don't like the fact that they are going to the store with that person. So you say psh. That's paralanguage, okay? Paralanguage is that almost called subtext, that language that is not being said, but is understood because of the mannerisms that go with the expression. Okay, paralanguage. The next one we'll move to are called haptics. Haptics is touching feedback. Okay, let's take, for example, if you're on a roller coaster with a friend, and that friend is really scared, and that friend grips your arm. Does that mean that that friend is feeling very relaxed at the moment? Probably not. That means that your friend is scared, so they grip your arm. Okay, that's haptics. Sometimes on your phones, you may see in your menu of options something called haptic feedback. Haptic feedback, if you notice, is when your phone vibrates and gives you a touch sensation when you adjust it every time you press a button or you press your finger on the screen. Several years ago, some of you will remember, and I know who would remember, but I'm not going to name them in this class, will remember when all of our phones had keyboards on them and we could use our thumbs to type in certain words. Well, as phones, our smartphones evolved, they got rid of keyboards. Now it's just a smooth screen. But some of the older phone users, like myself, liked the feeling of having something to press, like a button. So they incorporated something called haptic feedback. That's when you touch your smooth screen, but it almost feels like you're clicking a key. It gives you that touching feedback to know that a button has been engaged or a command has been engaged. Haptics are very similar in communication. They are communication through touch. Okay? Think about it. Think about if you were to go and hug someone and they didn't want to hug you. Do they push you back? If they pushed you back without saying anything, that does say a lot, doesn't it? The same thing is if you were to do the same thing and instead of pushing you back, they just kind of shoved you with an elbow. What does that tell you? Are they happy to see you? Do they want you to hug them? Probably not, right? How about when you're kissing someone? Some people have different ways of kissing. Usually, if you hold the head of the person you're kissing, that means you're really into them, right? If you're holding their head as you're kissing them, that's a very intimate way of expressing love and affection for someone you're kissing. That's a sign of haptics, haptic feedback. You're showing that you're really into that person, okay? So again, these are nonverbals shown through action, otherwise known as haptics, okay? All right, let's move on. Proxemics, if you would imagine, has to do with proximity. Proximity is the closeness or the distance you are from an individual. Proximity, I'm sure you've heard that before. What is the proximity of New York to California? Well, it's hundreds of miles away. What is the proximity of the speaker to the audience? What is the proximity of the sender and receiver? Proxemics can show us a lot of information when we think of the proximity of the individuals involved. This is when we talk about public distance, social distance, private distance, intimate distance. Public distance is when you're out and about. You're at the grocery store, you're at the movie theater, you're on campus. Even though it may be a private university, you're on campus, out in the open. That's a public distance. That's a safe space usually for everyone, but it's not very personal. A social distance, however, is when you are all in one place. Maybe you're at a restaurant together and you're sitting at the same table. Although you're out in public, you're not out in the street, you're not out in a field, you're in a building at the same table together. That's a social distance. How about when you're at someone's house and you're in the same room, maybe sitting at a table, or you're in bed together and you're just talking? That could be a private distance. And then we can kind of guess what an intimate distance is, right? Some of us know what an intimate distance is. I won't go into details about that, but you can imagine. That's the closest distance, right? That's an intimate distance. The span of distance that we have with the person we're talking to can mean something. If I was married and I had a wife and all the time that I was with her, I only kept a social distance, she might kind of think some things about me, wouldn't she? She would probably ask, why are you always standing so far from me? Okay? At the same time, if I had a good friend and his wife was standing there, and I always wanted to have a private distance with my friend's wife, I'm sure I'd be in a lot of trouble. So I keep a social or a public distance from my friend's wife. I do not have a private and definitely not an intimate distance. You see what I mean? Neither of us need to say any words. Just the distance that I have from that person can say a lot. That's proxemics. And of course, this applies to many things, right? Not just private relationships. But if I'm having a dialogue with you, say we were having a dialogue in person and we were in an in-person class. What if I had all of you sit in the back row of the classroom and I always stood in the front row to talk to you? What would you think about the class? If there was so much distance between us, if there was almost a public distance between us when we were talking, you'd probably think that this professor doesn't want to be around us. You probably would become more disinterested in the class because you're so far. Let's think about that conversely. What if I had a private distance with you when I taught you in class, and every time I wanted to teach you, I was this far from your face, wanting to teach you all the time? You would say, "Professor, get out of my face." Well, you'd be right, okay? So that's why when I'm teaching you in person, I would keep more of a social distance or maybe a public distance. The only time maybe I would have a personal distance is if you came in for office hours and you wanted to talk to me about class. We would be in one room together, typically like an office space, and we would be talking one-on-one. That would probably be as close as I would come to a personal distance from you. But let's take that one more example. Say you came in to talk to me during my office hours, and instead of having a personal distance with you, I had you stand on one side of the office, and I stood over here to talk to you and said, "Okay, tell me your problem." What would you think then? You would probably think that I have a problem with you, right? So I don't keep a social or a public distance during my office hours. It's typically personal space or in between personal and social. That's because the distance that we have, the proximity we have to the people we're speaking with, has a message in itself without saying a word. Okay, so that's proxemics. The next one we talk about is chronemics. As you would imagine, those of you who have broken down the word chron, we can associate that with chronology, right? Or a old-fashioned word for a watch or a clock, a chronometer, meaning the timing of something, okay? So when we think about the timing, we think about chronemics. All right, this might be an annoying neighbor behind me right now, isn't it? You guys tell me, is it an annoying neighbor who's being nosy? I don't know. I'm not even gonna look back. But I will tell you that chronemics is very important when it comes to the timing of things. And different cultures correspond with timing in a different way. We could have in the United States, see, I look back and I lost my place. See, this is why you shouldn't look back and be distracted when you're speaking. In the United States, we tend to think of chronemics as very important. Timing is important. We need to be on time. When I say that class starts at 6 p.m., I want all of you as my students to be there at 6 p.m. I don't want you to be there at 6:30 or 6:20 or 6:42. The time is 6. Just like when it comes to 9 o'clock, some of you are saying, "Hey, professor, time to end class, it's 9 o'clock, okay? Maybe you're not saying that. Maybe you don't tell me specifically, but do you use manipulators? Sure you do. Some of you use manipulators. Some of you look away from the camera. Some of you sit in a relaxed way. Some of you look at your watch. Some of you look very disinterested. Some of you, I can tell, are pseudo-listening. I'm going back to manipulators now, but that's how I know that chronemics is important to you as well, that you're sending a message that it is important that time of the class ends appropriately, okay? In other cultures, like in the Middle East, for example, timing may be a little bit more amorphous, meaning it's a little bit more free-flowing and less structured. They say that in a lot of African nations, the timing of something is less strict. On the opposite side, in Germany, some people say that you can actually time your watch to the metro station. I've been in Berlin, it is very accurate. So I wouldn't think that's actually an exaggeration, where the trains come very much on time, okay? So that's important. Chronemics can send a message. Let me give you another example. Say you were going in for a job interview and your interview was at 1 p.m. but you showed up at 1:33. Do you think that your potential employer would think that you're very enthusiastic about the job or that you really want the job? Not if you show up very late. How about if the job was at 1 p.m. and you decided to show up at 12:50, 10 minutes before your job interview time? That would show that your potential employer that you really want the job, that you are a person who believes in timing, that you're a person that likes to be on time for things. And that would probably be a favorable view for you. I know that I've shown up early to interviews before, and my potential employer said, I really like that you showed up ahead of time for your job interview. That's a point for you. So even before he interviewed me, I was already thought upon as very favorably because I was early for my job interview. That's chronemics. I'm sending a message that I really am enthusiastic about getting this job, that I really think that it's important, and that I really want the job, so I'm there early. That has to do with timing, chronemics. Okay. Monochronic culture and polychronic culture. Monochronic culture is when we think of timing as the most important thing, and we focus on one aspect of the timing in monochronic culture. In polychronic culture, we're thinking of timing in different ways. We're thinking of it as doing several things all at once, where we want to interact with our receiver, but we're also thinking of other types of communications at the same time. Okay? Let me give you a better example of monochronic and polychronic. Hold on one second. Let me look something up very quickly. It's taking longer than I thought. Okay. So this chapter describes monochronic and polychronic as, again, management of time, okay? So the book describes us in the United States as being very punctual. That's monochronic. But in other cultures, they may be more polychronic. Like I said, in Africa, other nations, they may be more polychronic. Let's take, for an example, the time that you went to a wedding. The wedding was supposed to start at 4, but they invited you to be there at 2 p.m. Okay, I've been to weddings like that. Well, that's because the marrying couple thinks that you will be late to the wedding on your own schedule. So they tell you that the wedding starts 2 hours ahead of schedule, so by the time you finally get in there, you'll still be early because the wedding starts at 4. Okay, that's polychronic. That's a way to think of something in a polychronic way. That's a sub-message saying, okay, I love you and I want you to be at the wedding, but I think you're going to be late, so I'm going to give you a time ahead of time so you can still be early even if you're late, because I know you that well. Monochronic is when you just stick to one time, okay? And you may tell people, come at one time, and you start speaking at one time. Polychronic is when you think of things in different time schedules. So, for example, if I was holding a meeting and it was with adults and with teenagers, I might tell the teenagers to come to my meeting a little bit earlier than I tell the adults, because I feel like adults adhere to time a lot more strictly and a lot more appropriately than a teenager might, okay? So that's polychronic and monochronic. It's not using any verbal communication, but it's using time as a way to express yourself. Okay. How about territory? Well, we know territory is our own space, okay? How do we use territory as a language, as communication? Well, when you choose your territory to carry out certain things, that's when you know that it sends a message of how you place that territory in your life. Okay, let's use an example. If you're doing homework at home and you are doing it at the dining room table, for example, the way that you do your homework at the dining room table may be seen a bit differently. It may not be seen as serious as if you said, hey guys, there's too much noise in the dining room. I'm going to my bedroom to work on my homework. I'm going to my bedroom to work on this project. That indicates that you going to your bedroom may be more serious than you in the dining room. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're saying, well, Professor, I thought you said it was nonverbal communication. So wouldn't that be verbal communication? When I said I'm going to my room, yes, that is verbal. However, how about if you never said that? How about if you were working on your homework in the dining room and you hear a lot of noise? Your parents turn up the TV, or your siblings start to play in the background. And then instead of staying in the dining room, you take your homework and you just, without saying a word, get up, go in your bedroom and close the door. That's nonverbal. But it gives an indication to your parents, your siblings, whoever is in the room making noise, that that homework is important to you, and you're using your territory of your bedroom for some quiet space where you can get your homework done. Okay, so that's territory. How about here? I'm at my parents' place, right? You can see my neighbor's house right here. I could sort of see my neighbor's house over here. I believe it was maybe the guy who just walked by. Throughout the years, this neighbor, the house next door here, has had various neighbors. This neighbor has been here ever since I've lived in this house for, I'm not going to say how many years. But this neighbor, I think this is probably the fourth new neighbor I've had since growing up. Sometimes there are lots of trees over here and lots of bushes. That neighbor, I think the second one since I've lived here, wanted lots of privacy. So they put up bushes there and they grew new trees. They wanted to create a separation between themselves and us. This neighbor, we started out with bushes up here, but they're all cut down. There used to be trees over here. They're all cut down. We have a very friendly relationship with this neighbor. We've known them for decades, okay? That talks about territory. Without saying anything, when this neighbor starts to grow new trees, we know, okay, that neighbor wants their privacy. When we became friendlier and spoke with these neighbors more and more throughout the years, we saw the bushes get eliminated, the trees get eliminated. And now my parents can stand on the porch, which is right here, and shout over to the neighbor clear as day, because there's nothing to obstruct their open communication. That's territory, using your space to convey a message. Okay, I hope that you understand the differences with territory, the differences with chronology and space. All right, so actually that is the end of the lesson. So in this lesson, we talked about nonverbal communication and how it's unavoidable. We all use nonverbal communication in our lives every day, whether it is shrugging, whether it is nervous tics, shaking our leg, or maybe tapping on the counter, or crying, or holding ourselves when we're cold, or fanning ourselves when we're hot, or whatever. We use nonverbal communication every day, and it's unavoidable. Even silence can be nonverbal communication. What if I came up to you and said, hey, did you say that you don't like this other individual? And you just kind of looked at me silently. I would probably think you're saying yes without saying yes. Just like when my parents would ask me, hey, did you take a donut from the cabinet? There used to be 10 donuts and now there are only 3. And I'm silent, knowing that I ate 7 donuts. But I don't want to tell them I ate 7 donuts. Purely a hypothetical scenario, but you get my point. Nonverbal communication is unavoidable, and even silence can be nonverbal communication. Okay, now we moved on to emblems like emblematic or emblematical. These are actions that have intended meanings that we all agree on, just like shrugging our shoulders, the head wobble. If you're in East India, you can understand the head wobble depending on the context of the situation. Here in the US, of course, we have the nodding of the head, the shaking of the head. I'm choking, look of disgust. we agree what those actions mean, even though they're arbitrary. Because in some countries, this means no, and this means yes. Not in our country, okay? So, we understand the meanings of those emblems. If we were to go to another country, those emblems could mean something different. How about the peace sign? If I went like this to you, peace, you're like, oh, the professor's saying peace. But back in the day, if I was in England and I went peace, they would be very insulted, because to them, saying peace like this means almost giving somebody the middle finger, which I'm not going to give you. I'm just holding up my index finger. But we all know that holding up our middle finger is derogatory, right? Well, in England, at a certain point, giving someone the peace sign was the same thing as giving someone the middle finger here in the US. I'm not so sure if it's the same over there, because we have become closer as a culture, so they understand that the peace sign here is something positive and not negative. So I'm not sure if it still means the same thing over there, but for a long time it did. Okay, so emblems, actions that we all share and agreed upon meaning to convey a message without saying a word. Truth bias means that you tend to accept or believe that someone is telling you the truth about someone, or that people generally tell the truth. Deception bias is when you automatically think that people tend to lie. People tend to not say the truth. Kinesics, the way we move, indicates communication. If we're relaxed, we move a little bit slower. We're more engaged. If we're uncomfortable, we may move faster. We may speak faster. Using nonverbals, we may just move faster. We may gesticulate faster. We may gesture faster if we are nervous. If we're relaxed, we may gesture less. We may gesture a bit slower. We may take pauses with our hands. That shows that we are more relaxed, right? Manipulators, the words that may fill in other words, or actions that fill in our words to show how we feel, okay? So those things that we do that may convey our communication without saying any words, but that also may affect our common communication. Those filler words that we may use, right? Affect blends, combinations of emotions that we may have on our faces, where we show more than one emotion at the same time. Paralanguage, language that we are using, or expressions that we may use that aren't really words, but they convey a meaning. Kind of like, or psh, or ugh. It's not really a language, but it does convey a meaning. What does ugh mean? Does it mean you're happy about something? Probably not. How about haptics? Haptics, touching feedback, touching communication. Okay? No words are exchanged, but the touch conveys meaning. Proxemics, the proximity we have to people when we're talking. The proximity we have when engaging in communication that sends a message. Chronemics, how timing on something can convey a message. Monochronic, how strict timing in certain cultures conveys a meaning, versus polychronic, where various times can convey a different meaning of something more relaxed or something more adaptable to a specific event that is trying to adhere to a time. And of course, territory, when we use our space and the way we navigate within that space to convey a meaning. Okay? Of course, if you have any questions, you can always email me, and I'll try to explain even more to you. But that is the end of our lesson on nonverbal communication, chapter 6. You've already been quizzed on chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, and now you need to be quizzed on chapters 5 and 6, 5 of which we went through last week for an extended period of time. And now you have chapter 6, where you can rewind, fast forward, pause, so you can understand the entirety of this lesson. You can always reach out to me using my email to ask for further explanation. Your quiz, of course, will be at the regular time, just like we did the last 2 times, so nothing changes there. But just in today's lesson, how this may change because we don't have that real-time engagement that we normally do. Okay, so there is a name for that when we do something at the same time that's contemporaneous. Okay, so this is not a contemporaneous lesson. This is outside of the normal time. It's not live. All right, so anyway, folks, have a great Juneteenth. Make sure you read, make sure you study, and I look forward to seeing you on Thursday. All right, take care, and don't forget to email me if you have any questions. All right, peace, and I mean that in a positive way.